CSS Day had 14 talks about some pretty interesting topics in CSS. Altogether, it was a little over 12 hours of amazing CSS content, and Adam and I, mostly Adam, are going to give you an overview of each talk in just an hour. We're going to talk about how design tools are falling behind with CSS, and this is something that I've been thinking a lot about lately because Adam's been talking to me a lot about lately, but I think it's true. We're going to cover how Tailwind CSS isn't at all like inline styles. And I'm not going to lie to you, you should watch this talk because it's pretty brave. Then there was this incredible font features talk in CSS where I love fonts and I had no idea you could do all of these things. So that one was amazing. And then also we're going to go over the magic of anchor positioning. And what's great about anchor positioning is okay, yeah, I don't really understand that one just yet, but maybe by the end of this podcast you will. And there were so many other great topics, so let us be your guide.
David, I was bad at something new. We have fans. I was at CSS Day, glorious 10-year anniversary of CSS Day, stellar event. Best CSS conference of the year, probably the only one. That's ridiculous. I can't believe it. Anyway, someone came up to me. They were like, bad at CSS. And I was like, what? We have fans? And I was like, dang it, where's David? This would be so fun. Anyway, they wanted me to take their picture with them, and I'm not good at that. I'm not good at getting my picture taken with people. Anyway, I think I looked at the camera, but I just wanted to share. I was bad at a different kind of CSSing, which was representing the CSS podcast.
We need stickers. That's because if you don't know what to do or say, you're just like, I'll have a sticker. And then, so we should just get stickers. That's the bad at CSS. And
that's a good point. You made a cool logo with the grungy thing. That would make a great sticker.
I don't know how I came up with that. It's one of those things where like it exists and I forget I did that. And I'm always like, oh yeah, I did that. I'm like, that looks good. And then, so Adam, I'm super, I did not get to go to CSS Day in Amsterdam, which sounds like just an amazing place. It's usually in Amsterdam every year, right?
It is. Yeah. Amsterdam rules. That's a great place. Yep.
Yeah. So I didn't get to go, because I didn't plan on going or anything. So I make it sound like I didn't get to go because I'm like, they don't allow me back there. not after year 5.
Who's David? Does he write CSS? I thought he just wrote bases of fire.
Oh, and so tell me what happened at CSS Day. What do we need to know? You went to a lot of talks. You learned a lot of things, talked to a lot of people. Give us the details about all the stuff that's exciting in CSS land.
All right, here is the rundown. So this is the high-level notes that I took while I was there, and hopefully, so they're going to publish these. So anyone listening, you can be like, this is just your sample platter. It's just like taking a cruise around the Mediterranean. You just make a short stop into some little country, but later you're going to do a deep dive, right? Everybody, right, listeners? You're going to go listen to the full ones of CSS Day? I thought so. Excellent answer to myself. I feel like Ace Ventura when I'm like, all righty then, answering my own little things. All right, so the first person who spoke was Matias Ott, who I've been following their blog for a long time. I walked to the speaker boat with them, and they were like, I love the CSS podcast. And I was like, hi, who are you? And they were like, I'm Matias Ott. And I was like, dude, you're awesome. I would have loved to have hung out with this person more because their talk was so damn good, dude. It's like one of their opening. So you could even tell, I think this was like their first talk or something. Also, I want to have him on as a guest. This is one of the people from I was like, dude, you got to come on. Your talk was awesome. You're awesome. It all works out. But he opened up with like, design tools are falling behind. And he's been teaching for so long, and so he's just entrenched in design and teaching and all this stuff, and it was really great. But he starts going into all the things that CSS can do. So this was a great intro to the event, which was a 2-day event. The opening talk is just like, look at CSS, look at all this cool stuff we can do. So he talks about the screen sizes. We have over 1,000 different screen sizes that we have to build our designs for. And if you try to micromanage each of those like screen sizes, you're going to be in a world of pain. So he's like, you got to work with the grain of the web. So he brought up that classic concept of working with the grain of the web, which I really like. Which also, by the way, side story, I've been realizing there's a lot of overlap with security and CSS. So this is like a
Okay.
podcast episode for another day where I'm like, the ways that security wants to find all the loopholes and find and mitigate um, error cases and things that and test code paths that they didn't know could be tested and make sure that there's no vulnerabilities in it. That's exactly like layout. You sit there, you resize your browser, you're looking for vulnerabilities, you're patching them up, you're finding undiscovered layouts that you didn't know existed, and you're making them. Anyway, so dude, there's totally a whole episode there. That was a sidetrack. But Matias keeps going on. He's like, CSS is a request, which is what I like to think about too. You're just requesting. You don't actually have control. A user can just go control plus 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 and destroy the font size that you so meticulously specified. You could just you could provide bounds with CSS. So what you're trying to do is just not let all the sheep escape their pen. You're not necessarily trying to put each sheep somewhere specific. That again is a world of hurt. So he goes into fluid type. He builds a fluid type system with trigonometry, which I've done a couple of things like, but he did one really cool. He was like using sine curves and shit. He also showed that you can use tan and atan2 to like get values out of things that you otherwise couldn't get values from. He was talking about typography on the web is way ahead of design tools, which is also something that came up again later. And another talk by Roel, and we'll go into that one here in a second. Color on the web is ahead of design tools. We have better interpolation on the web. He introduces a site called atmos.style, which I've never seen before. He creates a color palette using the sine curve so that the edges don't have a lot of chroma, but the chroma peaks in the middle. Was awesome. I literally that morning had told myself I'm going to build that demo, and he showed it on screen. He showed something with subgrade. He showed things with container queries. He introduces CSS early in the process. He wants CSS there earlier. And that's like why these design tools being so far behind, it's so frustrating. He wants decisions to be made in the browser because that's where they should be made. And he wants designers to write CSS. It's a very inspiring, very CSS power centric talk. And that was the opening to CSS Day.
That's quite the opener. And that's a super interesting aspect to consider with design tools because I do so much work in Figma, and I do it because it's like visual first and it feels good. But then what what it looks like in Figma and what it ends up looking like in CSS never like quite looks the same. And also, one of the things that you taught me to do was I used to really spend all this time in Figma trying to make sure that things were like lined up and good and everything. And then you were like, nah, CSS will fix that later. Like, it's a few pixels off here and there. Now CSS will, that's fine. And that's true. And then even I'm preparing an episode that's going to be sweet on subgrid. And one of the things I realized was design tools are better at subgrid than and layouts with subgrid than
That
subgrid
is
is
true.
at
Those
that.
global lines are really easy to snap to. That is totally true.
But that's actually what I do the episode on is how we get those global lines in CSS. And so
Mm,
but that's true. But one of the things though I realized is that I start to emulate what I want to do in CSS now in Figma.
yeah.
And then if I'm doing that, like even the way I'm using my oh my gosh, what are those called? They're those like auto layout groups, the frames where you can kind of say like, oh, this goes this way
Yeah.
with that. Yeah, I'll organize those the way I see like a piece of subgrid would be or something like that. And so then that way everything gets like proper spacing and gapped out. And I realized I am just recreating CSS without getting any of the CSS. And that's a really amazing point that he made with saying like, hey, that is design tools are falling behind because if you do an export of the CSS, it's not grid. It's not what you want. Sometimes it's pretty. Some of the values you can get are pretty good, but it is definitely you're not getting like a straight export out, or you're not even getting modern syntax.
Yep, I call those synthetic layouts because they're just like wannabes. It's a wannabe Flexbox layout. You can emulate grid, but again, these things are like all synthetic, and they can, yeah, the CSS that they give you can be a Kickstarter, kind of like AI can be a Kickstarter. It's like, hey, I solved your layout at one of the 1000 screen resolutions that you need to support. You're like, okay. And usually those, the code that it gives you is overspecified. But anyway, David, by the way, I just got to say, I've been watching your videos on the AI work that you're doing and the Firebase work and the IDX work that you're doing. And then you're kicking ass in CSS and you're using auto layout in Figma, bro. You are a unicorn wonder of your own. I don't even use Figma auto layout. I get in there and I get all frustrated. I'm like, fuck this. I'm tired of this. I'm just going to go build the real thing. I use Figma very much for expression. Like, I'm in there. I want to be in La La Land. Nothing's real. It's just boxes I push around. Like, I want to be in that space when I'm there. And I'm like, as soon as I get into like variables and auto layout, I'm like, psh, I'm just going to go to the real thing. But you're in there putting the time in, man. And your TypeScript is tight. Your backend work is tight. Your front end chops are tight. And your design chops are tight. You're just an animal. Anyway.
I appreciate that. I feel like that one of those unicorn is, someone who can do everything, or a company that reaches, like $1 billion or whatever. I feel like a unicorn that is mediocre at everything, but a lot of things. And so I may have like $1 billion worth of value, but it's like not competitive in several industries or something like that. Like, it's just, it adds up. But it looks great. But when you look at the sheets underneath, you're like, so you got to bring it all together. That's what makes it work.
Oh man, I love the humbleness. This show is so good at being humble about stuff.
It's the Bad at CSS podcast.
The Bad at CSS podcast, where we talk about the most advanced things in CSS you've ever heard of. Oh, so funny. Well, I'm going to continue recapping CSS Day. Yeah. Okay.
So we were at we went from Matias, and then he design tools are falling behind, and take us into the next.
Yep. Everyone's inspired. We're all looking at all this new CSS4, CSS5. I'm going to start using that term on here. That also got some new advancements over the event. Anyway, okay. So next up was Rachel Andrew talking about reading order. You make a layout with grid or flexbox, and then you say order reverse. Right? And now the last item is first. And so now the screen reader is still going to get item number 1, while your sighted users get to see item number 8 first. What do we do? Right. And so she talks about this issue, talks about new CSS properties that are coming out that are going to apply to flex and grid reading order items. And you're going to have this ability to say flex visual or flex flow or grid order or grid rows, grid columns. You can basically kind of describe through, once you reorder something or once you've changed the visual order, align the screen reader with it through these CSS properties. And so that talk was very cool. Of course, she had to drop her favorite line about layout, which is, we never know how tall anything is. Yeah, we just don't know. Everyone's like, why can't I animate to height auto? Because we're like, I don't know. It's a whole lot of I don't know having to do with heights. So the next talk was a bold talk about Tailwind.
Ooh.
So I was like, this is a crowd that very much knows what Tailwind is, doesn't use it at all, and someone's going to go on stage and pitch why it's great. I was like, that's why I'm saying this is bold. Like, this is like me showing up at a TypeScript conference telling everyone to use vanilla, Anyway, it was a great talk. They sort of were like demystifying things. And this is Sara, Dayan was the one that was giving the talk. They're from Mongolia. They're also on the cover of the Tailwind website. They're the image at the top of the adapting card. And they make some points like, hey, atomic style sheets and atomic utilities, they're not inline styles. They're not stuck to that local scope. They, inline styles are stuck local. They can't do animations. They can't do pseudo elements and stuff like that. Classes can. So that's not a fair comparison. She shows how you can do hover effects with Tailwind. Shows how you can do group effects, how sort of parent and child relationships can be in line with it. She shows peer invalid, again, with like the group effects. Touch effects, and and how these so they start pitching like how these open up doors for patterns and design systems. They say that the ClearFix class was the first utility class. And during this talk, I had two thought-provoking things that came to my mind while I was watching. One of them was a JavaScript thing, and it was it's funny to me. I just like, this is kind of like linguistically funny, is that higher level functions are somehow awesome, but low level code is awesomer. I'm like, which one is it? If I go, I need to pick a direction, everybody. Am I going to go higher level to be a badass, or am I going to go lower level to be a badass? Because you kind of are telling me they both make me badass, but the only high level one that doesn't make you badass, CSS. Like, this is so annoying. You can make a higher order function and be super cool, but if you make a class and encapsulate all your work into a pure functional, class, it's not the same. Anyway, that was just a random thought. And the other one was, she says, well-crafted systems liberate you. And I'm like, that is a great sentence, but I don't think they do. I think a well-crafted system just paves paths and it makes some choices easier. But the thing about any system, even no matter how well it's crafted, you're going to run into scenarios where it's not working with you and you have to go off-road. And so I just feel like there's this continuous, we want to believe this in design systems, that a design system will liberate you, but for some reason it notoriously becomes shackles in many different ways at some point. And then the weight of the entire system starts to be on top of you, and it's the opposite of being liberated. So I also just like living in these grays. I like thinking about the positives of things, the negative things, higher order function, lower level programming, right? Design systems and the shackles that may or may not occur from them. It was a thought-provoking talk. Sarah, you did a great job. I think it was better received than maybe anticipated when it started.
So one thing that I started out with Tailwind back when it was like in alpha. They've always nailed the design from like day one. But one of the things that I really loved about it is that it is true that especially if you are not very well versed in CSS, it allows you to move very quickly, and it does give you a lot of like what Sarah was saying, in the sense that you are writing in that sort of beginner way of like, why can't I write everything with just inline styles? And you can do that, but without a lot of the fallback or out of the consequence of doing that as well, because it is like a whole system. Like, I very much buy into a lot of the things that Tailwind provides. So I'm not like an anti-Tailwind person. I've been big on Tailwind from the beginning. The one thing that always grinds my gears has nothing really to do with Tailwind and more to be the perspective of Tailwind, is that a lot of people will discover Tailwind and they'll be like, great, now I don't have to use CSS. And I'm like, it's not how that works. It's still CSS. And people are like, well, it fixes CSS. And I'm like, it is a way to use CSS. It's still CSS. You might put some powder in your water to make it a sports drink. There's still water in there. Like, you're not eating the powder. Like, that part's not good. It's not good. The water is good. The powder, not good. Together, good. This is a really bad analogy. But I don't know. I kind of like it. But I've always found that people who just kind of write off CSS from Tailwind, I'm like, no, you're missing the good part. Like, especially if you're not great at CSS to begin with, and you should be listening to this podcast if that's the case. And if you are writing CSS or writing Tailwind, that should make you more curious about what you can do with CSS. Like, oh, I wonder what class, like you go to the computed section of that element after you apply that long list of classes and see what it looks like. And to me, that's always what I found so great about Tailwind. And Tailwind also has some incredibly intricate classes and intricate systems. And to see what that does to the actual like rendered element and what its computed styles are, that is one of the greatest uses I've found with Tailwind. And Tailwind has taught me a ton about actually what CSS can do. And so it's a great system, and it just should be looked at as like, it's a great system that really promotes CSS rather than saying like covers up CSS. Like, no, it's the other way around.
Totally agree. There's so many good things about Tailwind. I'm not a Tailwind hater either. I think that it's got plenty of superpowers, which we could talk about on a different episode. and then there's only like a couple things I don't like about it. And honestly, a lot of them are going away in Tailwind 4. So I'm kind of excited for the things in Tailwind 4 because to me, there was a little bit of config hell that I was getting into with Tailwind
Oh yeah.
3. So anyway, as that drifts away and becomes a little bit less in my face, I'm going to be more excited to get into that. But yeah, I think Tailwind is great. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, yeah. No, and the config problem is like literally almost any system, like or any dependency issue.
Yes, all the configs. We must config the thing that helps us so much. Okay, well, I'm going to burn on into the next talk, which was Julia Miocene, called Character Modeling in CSS. And they basically go on screen and build up from scratch like a little box fox until they have a running character in the very end that looks straight up out of Virtua Fighter. Did you play Virtua Fighter?
I didn't play it, but it sounds like something from my childhood. So
It's like
it was
early
something I
Tekken.
remember.
Think
Yeah,
early
exactly what I was
Tekken.
thinking. I'm remembering like walking through as a military brat. So I remember like walking through like the PX
Bowling
and
alley.
then like
Yeah.
and the bowling alley. And I remember seeing like that like machine, a Virtua Fighter. Yeah. And I think
Virtua Fighter. Yep.
yeah. Okay. No, that this rings a bell. This is also
You can
great
see all
podcast
the
material.
polys, like it's so low,
Yes,
like the
yeah.
poly count is so, all the faces are like super visible, but somehow you're like, it still looks like, it's almost like an early PlayStation, like
Yeah.
Cloud from Final Fantasy VII. You're like, it
yeah.
was so high res. And then you go look back now, you're like, dude, that's like 7 faces of like a polygon. Okay, whatever.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, they build it up from scratch. And not only do they do it with us, and show us all the sequence, they show us how to do skeletons, joints, shaping, light sources, and then they animate the whole thing into a realistic character. And they're basically a patient person in nirvana sitting in their room, making a flat face, twisting it, rotating it, positioning it, placing it, grouping it, and just piece by piece building a masterpiece. It's very inspiring.
Okay, so I have to take a stab at like how this. So this is all in CSS,
All in
HTML.
CSS, yeah. Yep.
So is this one of those ones where you use like a templating language like Haml to loop through and create like
No
a ton of
loops.
divs?
No.
Okay,
No, hand done divs, like arm, and inside of arm was like upper arm, lower arm,
I
elbow,
see.
so then they jointed off that middle one so that the rotations were all, and they didn't even like, they even with that extra mile where like rotations were a little beyond your things so that they rotated naturally. It was like a lot of attention to detail.
So each polygon has to be some sort of, we'll just say div for this case. It has to be some sort of div that gets put into some preserve 3D translate layer, and that gets moved. I assume like most of this is going to be in like a larger, like absolute positioned thing, so it can kind of get just transformed in 3D space. I imagine that getting the perspective values for that is probably very important. Whereas not like me, where I'm just like 1,000 on
1,000
perspective.
pixels. Yeah, I always do that too. Yeah. I'm like, I'm just gonna pick one now. Yeah, I'm sure they're definitely deliberately picking one in the beginning, and they have a couple. You can tell they have a. Well, they also start with just a basic box at the beginning, and that's what helps kind of set the stage for, hey, we're about to make a lot of boxes on top of each other, and then they're going to animate.
I've been wanting to do an episode on that actually, where we talk about 3D and CSS. So I very much wanted to catch this talk because I went and created a box where you have 4 divs that everything positioned absolutely, then all transformed together in 3D space, and then from there you can do some pretty incredible things with like rotations and whatnot, and it feels very 3D, but it's just 4 divs sort of. I mean, I guess it is 3D, but it's one of those like pseudo 3D kind of the way that you're doing it. CSS as a 3D modeling system is something that's kind of bizarre because at first you think it's going to be very difficult, but then when you put a box together, you're like, oh, that was actually pretty easy. And then when it comes to like using CSS properties for like changing values, you're like, oh, that was also pretty easy. I assume just like any 3D modeling system it gets way more complex the more complex the figure gets, but just doing simple 3D shapes in CSS isn't really all that bad.
Yep, totally agreed. Hey, side note, by the way, my first language I ever wrote was VRML.
Vermal.
Vermal, virtual reality modeling language in like 1998, and you would draw
Wow.
a 3D shape and place it in space. Just so I was just totally taken back while you were talking there. I was like, yeah, that's totally what I did in VRML, except they were actually 3D shapes and got to very similar to HTML and CSS, but in a 3D environment.
All right. Well, moving on. What happened? So we had our minds blown. We talked about some Tailwind. We did 3D. What do we got next?
Yep, reading order, and now we have a typography one by Roel
Ooh.
Nieskens called "Problems Solved by OpenType," and this was a very fun talk. The guy is super punk rock, very dry and cool, and I was like all about it. And so then they go into showing us all these cool things. So first off, the first part of the talk is about ligatures, and they do a couple of like really beautiful examples, and then they do a silly one. Like a silly one is they start typing like, I put my files in the cloud, and when they type cloud, it turns it into a ligature that says shit or no bullshit, and then
Yeah.
they're like, and then it gets gamification, and they were like, and then that one said fucking bullshit, and so it's like he's turning words using ligatures into it's just good stuff. He taught everyone about swashes. I don't think enough people know about swashes. These are like the
No.
extra flourishing elements that can be applied to capital letters in certain
Oh, I
fonts.
see.
So you get like the letter G, you're like, oh, that's a cool G, and you're like, watch it when I flourish it and turn on swashes, and then it's like, oh, it looks like a mermaid is coming off it or whatever. They go into variable fonts. They were very inspiring in their talk about light and dark. When you have a dark mode and a light mode, your font weights should be slightly different because of the way that our
Yeah.
eyes perceive contrast. I already have a demo about that. I opened up my demo, compared it about the advice he's giving, same advice, and then I also started adding some of the other font variation settings it goes into. So he goes into this cool thing where he's like, let's take this very generic looking typography layout, and we're going to employ a series of font variation settings and just perfect these little moments in here. So he does even like the @ symbol in a line is hanging down, and he goes, oh yeah, that's just a font variation setting. You do this and it aligns it into the middle. He takes all of the abbreviations that are like small caps and makes the small caps fit. The most mind-blowing one he did for me that I was like so happy. Okay, David, have you ever made the code element on a website? It's like you're writing a blog,
Yeah.
got the code element, which means a monospace font is going to be in there, and you want to make it look like a pill, right?
Yep.
But your function is lowercase, so like say the word const is in it, and you put it in the code element, and there's like a little bit of padding on the bottom, and then like way too much on the top. And so you start trying to do some line height tricks to get this thing actually centered, and it never works out. It's
No.
always this weird magical number thing where like the top has 0.35 m and the bottom's 0.05 m, and just some stupid crap you have to do. And he goes, oh yeah, we can use a cent override. So he goes to the @font face declaration, loads in the font, specifies a cent override, which basically trims off some of the letter box, and it's perfectly centered in like one line of beautiful CSS. And I was like, my God, Roel, that's beautiful. And again, design tools can't do this shit, man. Every
No.
single nudge and knit that he did, I was like, the only tool I've seen do it is Photoshop, and people don't use it anymore. And even those were like magical incantations inside of Photoshop that you had to know that the weird dinky little icon with the weird flourishy looking T would give you a flourished T. But he's in there codifying it all. Is awesome. And anyway, him and I are set to meet up in a week or two to figure out how to take all of these font variation settings, give them a custom property name, and put them in open props so that someone can just grab this grab
Oh.
bag of healthy, easy to use font variation settings. Because right now they're so magical. You got quote VRTM, and then a value of like 5. And you're like, what the hell does that mean? So we're going to give these things good names, make it easy to use, and empower people for font variation settings into the future. Roel, that was a great talk. So anyway.
I love anything with fonts. Like if you want to make anything look really good on the web, you just really hone in on the font of it. You could just be like white background, fancy, well-aligned font, and everyone's like, wow, what a great designer. And that's really all it takes. So these tricks, they really do. They take you super far.
So that's Stephen Hay, who closed out the second day of CSS conference. One of my favorite quotes from him, and he put it up on screen and showed a good example. And you just said it also. He said, good design is mostly typography and layout.
Oh, go. See, that's literally, yes.
I
I
think he
totally
even said
agree.
it's like 80 or 90%. He's like 80% of good design is typography and layout. And I sat there and I was like, I'm pretty sure I've heard that before, but it's never punched me in my face like it just did. And I loved it. I just made a demo today that was like a calendar, and the whole
Yeah.
beauty of the entire thing is just the layout and the typography. I've built something for a Google I/O workshop coming up. It's beautiful because it's layout and typography. Um, Man, it's just really, and then you can sprinkle in some color, and add some other kind of beauties. But yeah, dude, you're nailing it there. Where design good. It's just look at the bad at CSS website. That's just mostly typography and layout.
There's like, is there? I gotta look at it real quick. I don't think I put much color on it outside of
No, it's black and
the
white. Yeah,
logos. Yeah, the logos are color because you have to use those specific logos for
yeah.
like linking out
Spotify
to
and YouTube.
things.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, I was pretty deliberate about that because it's black and white, and which is cool. But then as soon as you want to add any color to that, it starts to be a bit of a statement. If you're adding blue, it usually means you're playing it safe and you're trying to appeal to everyone. It's cool, it's calming, it's fun, it's whatever. But it's not offensive. It's not. If it's red, oh, okay, now, all right. What are you trying to tell me? Okay, all right there. Uh, or it's like YouTube, where it's like it's just this exciting. This is
oh
live.
yeah, that's true. Yeah,
If you look at even like a lot of news networks like CNN is red, and everything with that is because it's
recording always.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So there's all the little things that color do very well to fit into the theme, and font as well. That all these little design nudges you have to do, they have to be used sparingly because they send a message. And as soon as you start introducing a color or a font because it looks cool, and I'm super guilty of using fonts because they look cool, but as soon as you start doing that, you are sending a message that maybe you don't even know you're sending. And a lot of times that results in you being like, this looks cool, but I don't quite like it. And it's because
Mm-hmm.
you're sending a message that maybe you don't quite understand. And that's why I picked the grungy thing. I'm now coming full circle, remembering now why I did the bad at CSS one, because I wanted the spray paint because it's not quite perfect. It's a little like we're bad. It's a little grungy, and I felt as if we did a really kind of like really bad design where it was like the original thing we did
Oh
with
yeah,
dev tools. It was accurate, but it wasn't really appealing. And
it's
so,
true.
and especially the colors that you get when you hover over on DevTools,
Oh man,
you get that
mauvey,
nice,
weird, orangey.
yeah,
Ugh.
it gets super grungy and weird. It looks like the bottom of like at the end of a paint set where all the you're
Nice.
you're like,
Just
oh, what
mud,
color
just
is
color
that?
mud. Yeah.
Yeah, so I realized like it sent the right message, but it just wasn't visibly appealing, or it wasn't aesthetic enough. So that I was like, what's aesthetic but also kind of still says we suck? And spray paint is that. Spray paint is very like, it's cool, it's grungy, there's this really kind of cool appeal to the drip of it,
Yeah.
artistic but not perfect. And actually, and also not, you don't, unless someone's like super high class doing like big street murals, most of the time when you see people with like the spray paint in mind, you're thinking, oh, they're not, they're just like some person on the street doing it. It looks cool, but they're not like a real like painter or anything like that. I don't want to say artist because it is art, but
Yeah, well, you get to see the craft. This is like something I'm loving more and more as AI does stuff. Is I want to see the craft. I want to see the flaws of the hand that did the work.
yeah,
And spray paint grunge is included in that. That's the fleck of air that caught a little particle that flung it somewhere that was undesired. And I'm like, no, that's super desired. It looks sick.
yep,
Rusted metal that you then
yep.
sand down, and you get this texture and this color that's impossible to recreate. Anyway, bro, we're sidestepping, and I love it.
We are so sidestepping.
I want to tell a secret. I'm going to release a secret here on our show that is. I teased a couple weeks ago on Twitter, and I said new centering techniques are coming to
Oh,
CSS. Be prepared to blow your minds. I don't know, something like that. And I had like an evil Dark Lord Kermit the Frog, because sometimes I sound like Kermit. So it'd be like, Kermit the Frog says CSS has a new centering strategy. Anyway, bro, I showed it to Roel after his talk. I was like, Roel, I need to show you I need to show you some demos, because this is just in Canary for the past few days. Bro, check this out. Text box trim and text box edge. and
Okay.
it is absolutely glorious. I'm talking about like buttons that you are perfectly centered, that you don't have to do bullshit on the top and bottom or the left and the right.
Oh,
I'm talking about, dude, you have a sidebar that's got a background of red, and then you have body text that's in the main thing on the right, and the top of the sidebar perfectly lines up where the text starts in the main content area, because you can trim the start off of the letterboxes there. There are so many examples, not only just alignment, but centering, that this is one of the most exciting typography features I've used in the web in a long time. I cannot wait to release my demos. I did tease a demo on my website. You'll see I said a super rad design. This was a thing where it's like super went down, rad was sideways, and design was down. So the letters connected in this kind of cool, like little shape. I redid that one with text box trim. Absolutely perfect capital letter alignments, even doing vertical text. It is so sick. Anyway, so Roel, he knew what was happening, loved it, and I was like, "You're my peeps, man. Let's talk more typography. Let's talk about variant font settings, and let's geek out about trimming things off of letterboxes." And he's like, "Yes."
that's
Anyway,
a that's another thing that CSS is speeding ahead of design tools on, like more control over letterboxes. That's a big pain in the butt in
big
design
pain in the
tools.
butt. And
Yeah.
honestly, a lot of design tools have to recreate the web's one because that's such the dominant player in its concept of half letting. Anyway, we won't go into half letting, but look it up, anyone. If anyone wants to know like why text box eds and text box trim are solving a problem, Google half letting in CSS, and you'll be like, okay. All right, so let's talk about Kevin Powell giving his first talk
Yeah,
in
Kevin
person.
Powell.
He gets to go on stage for the first time ever and say, "Hello, my front end friends," and very cool to see him do that. Also got to hang out with him a couple times. Super rad guy. And he talked about over engineering your CSS and why you want to do it,
Mm.
why you should over engineer your CSS. And I will do my best to summarize what he's talking about. But first, a couple of my notes, which one is even he took a long time to get into using grid. He was resistant to learning grid, especially named grid lines,
Oh
which
yeah.
you were a little hesitant on as well. And now I know you're on the bandwagon because that
Yep.
shit is amazing. And he's on the bandwagon too. So basically, he's up there like, I was dragging my feet, but now it rocks. And loved that he went up there telling everyone that. He dropped a bomb on everybody, that one person in the crowd, only one person in the entire CSS Day crowd knew that you could do this, that you can use calc in a media query.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You knew that? You
No,
son
no,
of a
no, no.
bitch.
Yeah, I remember
Oh,
you. No,
I
you. This was
tweeted it
such
or
a.
whatever.
No, no, no. I didn't tweet that. No, you got so hyped over this that this is like the behind the scenes on the podcast. Adam was literally he was messaging me a lot of stuff, but he messaged me that like immediately. He was like, "Did you know you could do this?" And I did not know at all.
Crazy. I loved it. I was like, wow, that's really, and he shows a really cool use case. He basically sets a media query. He's got template column sizes and he multiplies them in the media queries. Like if I want 3 columns, I'm going to say it's the media query 3 times the size of my columns or less. Then boom, I'm going to do anyway. It's like this really harmonious use case that was very cool. And so he kind of goes into over engineering your CSS. He goes to this example. He put out this video that he shortened a snippet down, and everyone was confused and mad at him. And he ended up redoing it again, but this time even more over engineering it to kind of try to be silly, and then realized something when he did it. So what he did is he refactored his code to lean heavily into custom properties that are surfaced at the top of the selector that basically give people a bunch of levers, and they're named. So you take all of the magic units that are otherwise sprinkled throughout your class or this layout that you're doing, and you give them a meaningful name at the top. And now, whenever you adapt one in a media query, whenever you change one, or even you're just revisiting the code, you get to know why these are there. So you get to have your cake and eat it too. If you do this, you get to build a very robust system in your CSS, but you also get to expose the meaningful parts to people through the custom properties there. Over engineering your CSS is good. And he shows a lot of really good examples, one of which was mostly about layout, a phenomenally powerful layout system broken down into a series of custom properties that you get to just pull levers on at the top and get what you need. Really cool talk. not really what I expected out of telling everyone to over-engineer your CSS. I'm very much someone that doesn't like over-engineering. It drives me nuts. But in this case, I was like, that's not over-engineering. It was a catchy title, blah, blah, blah. He didn't over-engineer. He engineered it very well. It's just a good solution. And actually, he exposed things to people in a really healthy way.
It's like
Great
lean
talk.
into the power of CSS is
Yes, it
kind
was
of
lean into the power of CSS. Yeah.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
expose it and make it easy for others. Yeah.
Well, I feel like you have to call that out with CSS because with any other language, like it's not over engineering. It's dry, or it's there's some architectural thing. They're like that's just the way, that's just the boilerplate the system needs. That's just how it works here. But with CSS, if you see too much of it, people are like, burn it with fire. I don't understand why that's happening. This scares me, and I feel like there has to be a message to say no. Like CSS does amazing things. You need to lean into it, and you need to really flex the muscles and not be afraid of all the things. Like whenever a lot of languages get complex, people get really like, look at this, looks really great. But when CS gets really complex, all of a sudden there's a problem. Actually, that's not
Yeah.
totally true. I will give TypeScript something on this one. Is that
Ooh, nice.
when you see those type those really
The letter
intense
T
typings,
with
yeah,
yeah.
reflections and all that stuff, and then they're override. Oh my gosh, let's see if I can pull one up on screen for this. There's some ones that are pretty gnarly. They do amazing things, but they're pretty gnarly looking. They just look like algebra. It looks like something in math class I should have paid attention
Yeah.
to. No one likes looking at that. Like very few TypeScript aficionados do. Like, so I will give that with TypeScript. You look at that one and you're like, that one needs to be burned with fire as well.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's always slippery slopes. And his example originally too was like there was somebody did something with like min width, max width, something else, and he turned it all into just a clamp. And that was what
Yeah.
caused the uproar. Is everyone's like, hey, I actually have to think harder, even though it's now 2 lines instead of 5 lines. I have to think harder about what's happening. You over-engineered it. And he goes, well, I'm gonna over-engineer it now. But by the time he was done and exposed all the custom properties, it's like, actually, shit's dope.
I did that the other day. I can't remember what I did, but I used a width with the min function. and I was like, what am I doing? But it worked. And so I was like, there's definitely something I should be doing with min width here. And like, but you know what? This is working. And and so I went on and I liked it. So I'll have to see if I can remember what I did. But I remember being like, this is definitely going to bite me later. But it didn't. As I kept going on, I had a responsive width, and all I did was set it right there. I was like, I like this.
Oh, that's awesome. Now I just want to see code bite people back, just like they walk away from the day. All right, I'm all done on a Friday, and code comes out, bites their ass. And it's like a mad dog at a mailman or something. Anyway, okay, let's talk about Sara Soueidan's talk, which was
Yes.
awesome. The biggest message for me here, and this is something that's been important for me. I used to try a different screen reader every couple of weeks to get good at
Mm-hmm.
them. But she goes up there and she's like, everyone learn how to use a screen reader. And she shows herself using a screen reader multiple times. And it's just a reminder. Anyone listening to this, if you have never used a screen reader, if anything, just use the one on your phone right now. There's really cool use cases for this. You don't have to have an in-app voice read a document to you or a website. You could use the screen reader built on your phone. It's like a couple of gestures away and it can start to read to you. You're in your car. You don't have any more podcasts left. You got some articles in your backlog. Boom, use your screen reader. I'm telling you, knowing how to use a screen reader is not just for QA. It is a superpower for you. Anyway, so they go on to talk about how to use a screen reader, or at least imploring people to use them. Look at the accessibility tree. So in DevTools, you can open up the accessibility tree. It's the representation of the DOM tree, but what a screen reader will see. And this is a great gut check for you to see what kind of information is my HTML, CSS, and JavaScript telling a screen reader so that when they read it. Anyway, they said beware of has. Has is very cool, but it doesn't give shit to a screen reader. So be aware of what you're doing there and try to inform a screen reader too, because it might not just be visual. And there was a kind of interesting dilemma around popovers that popped up. Oh, I guess that's funny. Not really. Anyway, they need to be closed when focus leaves. So if you have like a side nav that flies out as a popover, like a hamburger menu, if you tab out of it, it should auto close. Or should it? Should it be a trap? Should it not? Should it have been a dialogue that alerted the page? I don't know. There was this whole conversation about it. You can find the thread on Twitter. Sara Soueidan did such a good job, though. The only bummer was, it was, she is so incredibly intelligent about this stuff, and that the edge cases are harder than a responsive browser. And it's harder than trying to target the three major browsers. Trying to target all these screen readers and all these different contexts is an enormous task. It is a very specialized task, and it's a very important task. And uh, my backpack, like in a metaphor here, I left that talk and my backpack was just full of rocks. I felt so heavy. I wanted to climb up the mountain, but I felt like the amount of things that I still need to learn and things I still need to do were just incredibly heavy. And so I'm just going to work on a rock at a time. And that's what I mean. I'm going to learn a screen reader just because I want to test on device. So anyway, also learn your Mac OS screen reader. It's a hotkey away, and it's also very nice. You can see your headings. It's pretty cool. So anyway, Sara Soueidan dropping accessibility bombs on us, or just putting rocks in your backpack, I guess. But still, it was a joy. Everyone there, it was education we need more of. So I was really happy that I was there.
It's true, because you use a screen reader just to get through a homepage or something, and you're going to be very frustrated, depending on how it's built. And even small things that sites don't do, like skip to content, like style, accessibility. I can't remember the name of it now, but basically when you're tabbing through, they can say like, hey, hit enter here to skip to content on the page. Otherwise, every time someone visits your page, they have to tab through every single thing before it's the core part of the content. So any header or anything like that. And there's just little things you realize also when things get to like lists, like ULLI, you will tab over a lot of times things in those lists, whereas what you really want to do is turn that into an arrow key. So you tab to that, and then you can arrow key through it, because it could be like 50 things in that list, and so the user can choose to arrow key with it. Or if they don't want to go through that whole list, they don't want to like nest into it, they just tab away. And so all these little things that you don't realize are really frustrating to do until you try to use a screen reader or you try to do keyboard only navigation. You're like, okay, yep, all right, let's fix that.
Yep. I always say screen readers are so if you've ever played Mega Man, have you played Mega Man, David? Are you a Mega Man fan?
Very long time ago.
Okay, so Mega Man has this thing where not only are the levels incredibly punishing, the bosses are super difficult. And then when you think you've beat the game, you have to beat all the bosses all over again, and they're even harder. It's like they just throw the whole game at you. But anyway, that's a Mega Man thing. And why I'm bringing that up is like when you're building a website, not only is it difficult to just build the website for one browser, you then have to satiate 3 different browsers. Then you have to satiate all of the different screen sizes and mobile factors and devices. Right. Then you have to satiate keyboard, mouse, touch, and screen reader. And then the screen reader one is another set of a final boss of 5 bosses. So you thought it was just, I have to have screen reader support. No, turns out that set of bosses is harder than the entire game that you've even gotten until you're where you're at now. Because they're all so different. There's no interop 2024 for screen readers. We have that for browsers, but we don't have that for screen readers. So it's just all over the place. It's a very difficult problem. I'd like to see it get better one day, but it's really tough. So anyway, building on the web is hard because of form factors, people, browsers, screen readers, all these things coming together. Whereas if you write a backend in Go or in Node, all you have to do is make one compiler happy, one runtime happy. That's it, just one. And guess what, David? You get to pick the version. Imagine if I could pick the version of the human. I pick the version of the human. I pick the version of their phone. I pick their phone size. I pick the way that they're going to interact with it. And then I build an app. That's what it's like building on the back end. You choose your environment. You pick the version. You make one thing happy, and then maybe your manager happy. That's it, dude. On the front end, we are making 15 people happy in this hostile, chaotic environment. And also, I love it. I love it so much. It's so hard, but I love it so much.
one of the great engineers I've worked with in my time, Chris Rayner, shout out Chris Rayner. He worked very early Firebase and was one of the core and at many times the only person working on building out Firebase hosting back in the very early days, like 2013. And he built out this whole backend system, and then he had to build out the CLI for it. And he had just done all this gnarly backend work, configuring CDNs, atomic deployments, cache invalidations, like all this stuff, and then goes to build the CLI. And he told me, like, this is so difficult because that's client work. And he's like, there's so many different like versions of nodes someone can be using, or so many different like, and this is not even like UI screens. And he was like,
Yeah.
the client, and he's this amazing backend engineer. And he is like, I actually did a Firebase podcast episode, the very first one I did, and I have him on the podcast saying like, yeah, no, client side work is much harder because it's so unpredictable. Whereas with server world, it's predictable. I can tell you like this connects to this and this does that and this is on this, and like that's my job, is to make it predictable. But with the client side, I can't make it predictable, and we have to be resilient in the face of unpredictability.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's awesome. I mean, that's what CSS was made to do, to be
Yep.
resilient in this space of unpredictable. That's kind of why I say it's like security. I even shared a tweet. I think I shared it to you too, where another podcast, a guy was like, if you can do a layout in CSS grid, you can learn assembly language. He's like, assembly language is so much easier than CSS. And
I don't know
that's
about
even just
that, but
talking
I'm
about
glad
grid.
to hear it.
I know, I agree. I'm like a little doubtful, but I do agree that like a human has to use your CSS grid and their browser, and there's like so many factors that come into just that moment. And I do agree that it's so much more subjective. It's so much harder to fulfill that task because it's just so much. There's so much chaos in it. Okay. Anyway, this episode is getting long, and I
Yeah,
have
I know.
multiple speakers that I need to talk about here.
Okay, let's lightning
Lightning
round.
round him. All right.
Yeah.
So Tab gets in to show, he starts talking about anchor positioning and just goes through the spec and each of the different features. He taught everyone what a containing block was. One of my favorite features here is that position absolute can now use the align content and justify items syntaxes.
Oh,
Seriously, it's so sick. I have a prototype already. If you have anchor in your browser, you can also use these keywords with position absolute. It's super rad. It's like one of those things we should have had for a long time.
Now I'm just everything's position absolute in my layouts. It's over now.
But yeah, you can say place content center or place self center in the middle of an absolute layout. It's amazing. Anchored elements can be aware of each other. Scrolling in Anchor is complicated and quite limited, but there are features and capabilities that allow you to do this. Anchor doesn't follow transforms. This might change. So like you transform an element 100 pixels over, and then you go anchor that element. It will anchor it from where it was, not where it is. The GPU has moved it somewhere after it's containing blocks. So right now, anchoring is about containing blocks, not about transform boxes. It's a kind of clutch and is probably going to make it unusable for a lot of people, but maybe it'll change. We'll see. Try options or space aware, which is cool. Try order is really neat for maximally available visually. So you can try an order, try to be visible as much as you can, and you can give it a set of stuff. Position visibility allows things to hide themselves as anchors aren't visible. So let's say you have something anchored to something else, but that thing scrolls out of view, your anchor will automatically hide itself because the thing it's anchored against is no longer visible. Position visibility. And the last thing is I've been working a lot on the carousel spec, and we were previously using grid areas, named grid areas, to put things like the dots and the buttons on there. We're going to switch to anchor because not only will it help with CLS, initial paint is faster, but now people can just anchor things around, just anchor them around your carousel. It's freaking super cool with all these rad keywords. So that's going to be a nice enhancement there.
Sounds like anchoring is a big deal. That
it's a huge deal, almost like scroll information.
Yeah. It's something that is not quite being understood in the larger like ecosystem of like, no, this is a really big deal. And I think, okay, we're gonna have to do a whole episode on this.
We're gonna have to do a whole episode. I need to do one too. Uno's got a great tool that helps people visualize it, but like one of many features that it knows how wide something is. You can anchor something to something else and span its intrinsic size. Like that shit is not possible in a lot of other scenarios, and this can do it with a couple of keywords. It's really cool.
All right.
Cool. Then we had Carmen come on, talk about scroll-driven animation, showed us a bunch of cool demos, some audiokins, a lot of sprite sheets that were animated on scroll, looked really cool. Talking about how you can aid in info intake. So if you scrolly tell, you can help people consume the information that you want because you can guide them through the information. You can also aid in sensory overload. So instead of just giving them everything all at once, you can conditionally present things. And the browser is your friend. It handles everything between keyframes. Then Roma came on, who's the one that Kaizu.dev, and they talked about impactful experimentation and how they kind of their thought process around using all these new features and APIs and how they try to break things and how they try to build things and how they take different people's blog posts and get inspired and build something new, and the combination of all those things. They introduced us to space toggles and cyclical space toggles, which, by the way, did you see that CSS got the if statement?
What?
CSS is about to have a proper if, bro. If else in CSS. I'm doing a little slow dance, everyone. If you're, I'm like, this is victory. It's real now. It's a real programming language.
We waited until like 50 minutes in. Let's talk about an if statement.
Well, I mean, it was part of CSS Day. That was just done at the CSS face-to-face. That happened a week after.
Episode.
I just wanted to bring it up because Roma shows space toggles and cyclical space toggles, which are use dry switching and the initial and an empty state of a variable to simulate if else and conditionals. It's a mess to read. I love that people are able to do these things, but I'm seriously like, do not put that code in my code base.
Yeah.
It's really hard to follow, and debugging is a pain in the butt. So what we're going to get is a proper if else statement that's going to allow you to present a condition, and what happened, it's almost like an inline ternary, except it's a little bit more official than that. Super cool. They showed us Roma showed us some mix-ins tricks, some function tricks, implemented some sort of scroll-driven animations with the Anchor API, and the scroll-driven animation API is more powerful than people think it is. It can do a lot in there. Josh Comeau gets on to teach us how to teach CSS. Really great fundamentals breakdown. They're like, hey, you put an image in a page and there's like that weird little 5 pixels at the bottom. What the hell's going on there? That's because its default vertical alignment is to baseline, and that's the half letting of the text that it's next to. All sorts of like cool little niche things, trying to help people understand the fundamentals so they're not frustrated when they run into something. It's like people using React and not knowing JavaScript and being frustrated with actually a JavaScript issue, not a React issue, but telling React they hate it. And the reality is that they just didn't understand a fundamental what they did. Stephen Hay closed it out. By the way, day 2, I wasn't there in person. I had to pay to, I happily paid $10 to watch these live stream. I got sick on day 1. You can still hear it in my voice, and we'll talk a little bit about that more here in a second. I was super bummed out watching these I was there in Amsterdam. I'm like 5 minutes away, and I couldn't be there because I was so gooey. I had green goo. I was like, my back ached. Dude, I'm still sick. I got pretty sick there.
So that was another GUI challenge for you?
It's a GUI challenge in real life. Good call, dude. Very nice. My wife's going to appreciate that one. I'll tell her later. Anyway, I was sick. And so Stephen Hay closes out the day. I really like Stephen. We've hung out many times, but I got to watch his talk. I think he actually closed out day 1. Anyway, whatever. His talk was all about like good design, what goes into thought processes, how to prototype, design tools, again, not necessarily being the end all place to do the ideation, etc. It was a great talk, very like design strategy conversation. And then Elika gave a talk on standardization stories, and they shared things like, hey, here's a fun thing that happened back in the day with IE6. Hey, here's the thing that happened when Firefox did this first and then Chrome screwed it up. Hey, here's a browser that's a villain. Hey, here's a browser that's a hero. Hey, here's some standards moments that were villainized. Here's some standards moments that were awesome. Wow. All in all, the conversation and this talk was about, if you tumble a rock enough times, you'll get some pearls, and those pearls are what we call CSS specs. And
that's good.
It was a good talk.
I gotta check that talk out. That sounds really interesting.
Okay, so we're at the very end. I already mentioned I got sick, and I want to tell a fart story.
He had been promising this before we recorded, so I didn't hear the story either. So I'm kind of interested to see what's going to happen here.
All right, so I get to Amsterdam day one, which is like the day before the conference, maybe 2 days before, because I always like to get a tattoo. I got a really cool tattoo. Well, I think it's cool anyway. It's a fire. I told the artist Firebug, and he ended up drawing me a dragonfly and fire. So I have a proper Firebug tattoo, but only in the
Nice.
sense that it's nerdy in its name, but it doesn't look like the original one. Okay, so anyway, I'm there. I'm there early. I end up hanging out with Miriam Suzanne. Mia is super cool.
Yes.
And we're just walking around. We're both super jet lagged, trying to stay awake so that we can fall asleep with the darkness of light or the absence of
Of
light.
night.
Anyway,
Of night.
right.
Okay.
So we're walking around the city. Totally. I call it toucan samming, where we just follow our nose, like, oh, follow your nose. And, just whatever we need to do. I had a chore. Okay. So we're walking around. Mia's super cool, very laid back person. So laid back, they fart while they walk. Okay. At least that's what I thought. And the first one, we're just like walking down an alley in Amsterdam. And I'm like, haha, totally heard that. But she doesn't look at me at all. She doesn't acknowledge the fart as if she didn't fart. And I'm sitting there going, I heard you fart. I'm obviously cool with the fart. I don't know why you're not owning up to the fart. So what the fuck, fart? Anyway, I let it go. And not a fart. I let the concept go.
What is the story?
and we were walking down the street again later, and she farts again, and I'm like, and I look, I'm like, like as soon as someone farts and you like look right at them, you're like, you can't ignore me. I'm gonna look you right in your eyes and let you know with my face that I heard your fart. And again, she doesn't even look at me. She just keeps walking. And I'm like, these are clear farts. I'm like, I've never misheard a fart before. Have you ever thought you heard a fart? You're like, I thought I heard a fart. And then later you're like, it wasn't a fart at all. No, you're like, I'm very good at knowing the difference between a squeaky door and a fart. Like you can't fake me out. Anyway, so I hear Mia fart twice, and I'm like, I'm fart positive. I'm like, cool, fart away. We're outside. It's not like you're suffocating me. No fart shaming, nothing. Anyway, but she's not even in fart denial. She's like, she doesn't even know she farted or whatever. I don't know. It's like that South Park where all the old people are walking around and they're farting, but they don't know they're farting. Or at least they act like they don't know they're farting, but anyway, whatever. Okay. So anyway, dude, I heard Mia fart twice while we're out hanging out, and I don't say anything about it. I did the first one. I said something, at least I thought I said something. So then, okay, so now it's the first day of the conference, hanging out with Mia. It's at the end of day one. She emceed. She did a great job. I'm drinking a one of their tiny Heinekens they had. They had Heinekens. They were tiny. Anyway, it's a tiny Heineken. Tiny Heine. Oh, it's a tiny Heine. They should have had that on the bottle. Okay, so I'm drinking a tiny Heine. And I'm like, hey, Mia, I just want to let you know, it's cool if you want to fart around me. I heard those farts while we were walking. And she's like, what? I didn't fart while we were walking. And I'm like, hold on. You did. I did. I heard we were like alone in one of the alleys. You farted. She's like, Adam, I did not fart in around you. And I was like, I was stunned. I'm like, I heard ghost farts. What did I hear? David, I still don't know what I heard. I heard flappy farts, man. And I'm like sitting there, like now she's telling me, she's totally being honest. I believe her. Mia, I believe you. You did not fart next to me. But now I'm lost in myself, David. I'm like, am I going crazy? Am I just being haunted by farts of past people in Amsterdam? Are these just like, so that's my fart story is I thought I heard Mia fart. She apparently didn't fart. I called her out for farting. She said I didn't fart. And now I have to reconcile my own existence with, I hear farts, David.
Do you know?
It's my sixth sense.
You're going to start a reputation where people are going to be like, hey, oh, there's Adam, watch out. That guy, he hears farts and then he blames you for farting.
He blames it. Oh, it was actually me.
It's actually it's a thing. No one farts, but but he swears by it, and he will remind you for days that there was farting. So just get prepared. He's
that is
great at
funny.
CSS though. Super great guy, but there's this thing with farting.
He's the fart scapegoat king. He'll fart and blame it on someone else. That's so funny.
That's another South Park. Maybe you're just hearing music, because that's another South Park episode where I don't remember, one of the kids reaches a certain age, and then all of a sudden,
all the pop music
sounds like farts. Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe you've gotten to an age where all the music.
This
sounds
music
like
sounds like
farts.
crap, and he turns it on. It's like, yeah, dude, that's a good.
Maybe that's your problem.
That's a good South Park. Oh,
Well,
maybe.
I don't know how else to end an episode other than that. So CSS Day, these are going to go out to YouTube over certain periods of time. I would love to whip together a fun intro for this with those videos or intersperse stuff. So I'm going to keep an eye out for that. But I know that usually CSS Day comes out to YouTube, so we'll try to drop links to those or any type of anticipation for it. I want to watch a ton of those talks, so definitely check that out. We'll put people's bios and Twitters and websites and blogs in the descriptions, because that's some super awesome stuff. And if Adam has any other like fart stories too, we will link directly to those, because I have a feeling this is just the first of many times that this is going to happen. So
I'm so happy that this might be my sixth sense. But like, I hear farts. I'm gonna go watch that movie, The Sixth Sense, and just like replace all of his ghost references with fart references, and just be like, "At me, it me." Oh man.
My gosh. Well, thank you all for listening to the Bad at CSS podcast and the Good at Farts podcast, or Bad at Telling Farts podcast. And if you made it this far, you definitely got a great fart story. So that is all for today, and we're going to see you all in the next one.
Visit the Bad at CSS podcast.